Yeah, when we think about all this different technology and hiring people, I mean, something that's very important to us is diversity. How do you think the industry is working and evolving around overall diversity, both in gender and other backgrounds?
Well, I definitely think it is getting better. I have to say, when I started, there were a lot fewer women, in particular, involved in data, but it's no longer really seen as an IT career. Data is a career in its own right now, and we see a lot more diversity and inclusion across the data communities. And I think with data, we're very conscious that you need diversity of thought to be able to develop solutions with data. And you need diversity of thought to ensure that you are, not creating bias, and that you can uncover bias in a data set. Data ethics has been talked about a lot over the last few years, and particularly in relation to developing algos and AI, machine learning. But in general, in any data set that you're going to make available to an analytics team, you have to be able to root out the bias. And there is a historic bias built into historic data sets. And we have to acknowledge that and, work around it. But we have to build data sets for the future that do not have that inherent bias already in the data set as well. So we need to be really conscious of it. And I certainly am seeing a lot more female talent come into the data industry. It's universal. So, it's certainly a career that anybody in any jurisdiction across any ethnicity can get involved in. And we really have to encourage that to ensure that we do have that diversity of thought built into how we develop data solutions.
Yeah, I think it's very important. I remember the industry conference I'd get to, 15, 20 years ago. Women in technology organizations were just starting within there. Be small, but in the last several years, you have hundreds and hundreds or thousands, depending on the organization that you're involved in, and it's great to see the momentum there. And it's taking those stereotypes off of it. We're not IT professionals; we're professionals that happen to work with technology, right?
Exactly.
One of the things that we always like to talk about, what are some of the major predictions that you might think are coming down the pipe around data analytics, data virtualization, that you could foresee if you had your crystal ball?
Well, so much has changed in the last few years. Honestly, I said earlier that, lineage was just seen as too difficult to do 5-10 years ago. And if you were doing it, you were using Visio and spreadsheets. And now look at us, we have a capability like Solidatus using Knowledge Graph to deliver that. So it's very, very hard to predict out too far with data because it changes so quickly. But, what I will say is that the challenges moving forward will probably be keeping ahead of the innovation curve. So scanning the horizon to look at those new technologies, the changes that are coming. It's absolutely key to have that as part of your role as a CDO, is that horizon scanning, to look at what is not just the pain points and the new regulations, but what are the new innovations coming, the new technologies that are coming, which is actually quite a nice thing to do as part of your role as well. But we have to also, address the kind of the legacy and the data trauma that firms and governments have faced over the last few years and over the last year with the pandemic in particular. Not being able to access the data required to manage and track and trace individuals and, health concerns has been particularly problematic. So I think government and public sector really have to solve the problem of not being able to share data between, trusts or even jurisdictions or even governments and countries. So that has to be solved. And some industries like financial services have more or less solved this. As I say, that a data visa program at HSBC, 62 jurisdictions. If we could impart some of that knowledge to our colleagues in government and public sector on how to do that, I think that's going to be absolutely key. We also have to respect citizens' data privacy, obviously, and the private sector can really help at the public sector, again, with solutions on how to do that, with knowledge, technologies, experience, precedents. So that's something that's top of my mind at the moment. And we haven't really mentioned ESG that much and the role of the CDO in this interview. It probably is the subject of a whole nother interview, but quite recently, the CDO has been brought into the conversations around environment and social and governance. And only quite recently have, those responsible in organizations realized that data is key, absolutely key, to be able to understand and track all of the various principles, standards, and recommendations that are out there. You've got the UN Sustainability Principles. You've got a new, European regulation. You've got the World Economic Forum. They're all different, and we have to be able to manage that ambiguity across all those different standards through the data, the transactions, the processes that we have in our organization, all the way to disclosures and reporting. And of course, the commitments that both governments and CEOs have made around, being carbon neutral by 2050 or 2030. They are big, big, big commitments. And they have to be able to trace through their organization how they're going to manage to do that. This is not a tick box exercise for anybody. And it'll be key to an organization and a government's reputation to be able to show that traceability through their organization all the way to that commitment and where progress is actually being made. So I think, ESG is going to occupy CDOs quite a lot over the coming years. And technologies will have to be developed to deal with some of the commitments for ESG. But thankfully, we have Solidatus that has already been developed to allow us to trace the commitments that have been made. So Lineage will help to map the standards, manage the ambiguity, and track progress all the way to commitments and disclosures over the next few years.
It's interesting, you ended with, going outside of the organization and talking about organizations, talking to organizations and at the world level, at the local level, collaboration and data sharing is going to be key. You think about, the COVID challenge we just had, sharing was very important through that whole epidemic to be able to, get to vaccines and so forth. So, thinking about the future challenges that we have, you mentioned, ESG and so forth, how is data going to help us, accomplish, bigger goals faster and make sure we're also accountable at the end of the day.
That's exactly right. And, we all have a responsibility in an organization to the data, absolutely. But we have a huge accountability to the planet as well. So, I think ESG is going to be a really interesting, tough challenge over the next few years, but, really interesting space to work in.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you, Lorraine, for joining me today. And please visit cdomagazine.tech for additional interviews. And it was great talking to you. And I learned a lot about Solidatus and what you guys are doing over there. Probably like to learn a little bit more too. So,
honestly, thank you so much for the interview. I really enjoyed speaking to you as well. And by all means, reach out if you want to hear more.